Welcome back to Policing TV, where I'm again joined by Ruari Hardy, the head of law enforcement on Guernsey, down in the Channel Islands. Welcome back, Rory.
Hello there. Well, thank you.
In the first session, Rory, we talked about your busy and fantastic career in the Metropolitan Police in the UK, and some extraordinarily difficult and challenging jobs you did there. But I think it was 2002 you ended up in Guernsey. So that's quite a trip. So just wanted to explore in this segment just how you ended up on Guernsey. And I will just out this. You joined back as a constable and from being a DI in the Met. So I'm really fascinated by that journey through the ranks on Guernsey that took you up to leading the force for a good number of years. And as you come towards the end of your tenure, but a fantastic job you've done down on Guernsey without a shadow of a doubt. So please just tell us about how that came about from Croydon to Guernsey.
Yes, certainly the view out the window is a little bit different. The main reason was my wife grew up in Guernsey and her family lived here, and we'd obviously visited on quite a regular basis. I obviously threw myself into my work in London, lock, stock and two smoking barrels. And there did come a time when you reflect. And I have a family, 3 daughters, all quite young. And also there were family members in Guernsey who needed a bit more support. And Mrs. Hardy and I had long conversations about that decision. It wasn't an easy decision. The one thing I suppose in the back pocket was I could have come back into my role and rank in London for 5 years if one side decided to move. So we looked at it hard, looked at property prices and whether we could afford the move. The one thing that you did mention, at that time, the chief officer who was in post wasn't able to recruit at any rank other than constable. So I was obviously substantive as a DI in London, maybe looking at the next rank in London. And that was a significant point of discussion about taking that risk. I have to say, I'm really pleased I did. What I experienced in London was brilliant, but what I've experienced here, it's like a football game. It's a game of 2 halves, and it's been a totally different experience. Trevor, I know that you've worked in small communities, and from a policing perspective, they bring unique challenges. Police officers are police officers, whether they're in London or Guernsey. They have the same passion, the same motivation for their skills. The one thing here is we very much live and work within our community. And it is so important that we get the job right because we are part of that community. So I came to Guernsey and, yes, went back onto the shift here as a constable. And I loved it. I really did love it. I wear my heart on my sleeve. And there I was doing early, lates and nights again. But 1 or 2 things happened that local officers at more senior ranks, although I was a constable, said, "Oh, could we ask you to help with this? We've got a particularly challenging job." One was a sudden death of a young person in very challenging circumstances. And it was something maybe that, the local team fortunately didn't get to deal with very often. But with my background and experience, there was an invitation, "We would appreciate your help," which for me, coming in where that sort of reception could have been a bit different, a bit more distrustful, it was exceptionally welcoming. They were a great team, and I think they recognised the skills and experience I brought with me. So dealing with some lower level jobs without any problems, but also being involved in some more complex things with colleagues who've been in the force a long time, but realising, we could always, a part of a team, make the best job we possibly could of things. There was that real feeling of a small team rather than, the outsider wasn't trusted. So I think for me, because the start went so well, I've stayed and I've got to know everyone here. As I say, police officers are police officers. We do the same job, whether in London or Guernsey, but in a different way, knowing our own local circumstances. Guernsey didn't have the same levels of really serious and violent crime like the street robberies, the burglaries. But at that time, there were a lot of threats from drugs, threats from child protection. There were some very active and disruptive criminals on the island. And I have to say that over the years I've been here, I think the approach to some of those threats has been really, really good, and it's worked very, very well. So I did a 6-month period as a constable, and then I ended up working in CID as a detective sergeant. And I think I did about 9 months as a detective sergeant when I applied for inspector. And I did about 18 months or so, perhaps a little bit more as an inspector. And then some chief inspector vacancies came out, and I was successful to reach the rank of chief inspector. But the policing environment here is as challenging as anywhere. We're a very, very small force. We have to have the full capability of a UK constabulary with an authorised strength at the moment in terms of our financial ability is about to 150 police officers. At the moment, we are probably 17 or 18 short, and we are recruiting, and we've actually got some staff in training. We are a small jurisdiction, and we work very closely with the customs and immigration because we're all law enforcement officers, and to a degree we're all dealing with the same cohort of issues and problems in slightly different ways. So the island has to be able to manage and service all the law enforcement needs, as I say, of a small constabulary force. And it is a challenge, it really is, but I think it's a unique challenge. And I think working in jurisdictions like this, they are safe communities, relatively safe. Obviously, we have had serious crime on occasions, and we've had to step up and deal and manage with that. But also, it is a good place to live. It's been a lovely place to live in terms of the family and the freedoms that they've had that they wouldn't have had if we'd stayed in London. And in terms of careers, a lot of our staff, they manage the work we do because we have staff who multi-hat. We have staff who are frontline operational shift officers, but they're also firearms officers. We have detectives who are the same. They're AFOs when they have to be, when they're not doing their core roles. We support our economic and financial crime team. And that with the challenges of financial crime is an area that, we'd welcome applications from people who have backgrounds in that kind of work. But it is something in my life, I suppose, that we've achieved on behalf of the family, a really good work-life balance in terms of still being able to give that professional commitment and step up and do those challenging work that you have to do in law enforcement, as well as having the privilege of living in a really beautiful island.
Yeah, I mean, you're spot on. It's the multitasking nature of policing, and on paper it should seem almost a retirement job for you halfway through your service. Come and relax on
Yeah,
Guernsey,
yeah,
and you are
yeah.
right, because you've got to have all the capability of a UK force, who will have thousands, right from. I mean, I think it's an extraordinary effort. You've got your firearms training license, and all those things take a huge amount of work. You touched on customs and immigration. Of course, the small island territory has a lot of border, and it's right on your doorstep. And you're also a national police force, and people forget that. It's quite a challenge. So, how does I know your current role, you're head of law enforcement, and you're head of law enforcement because you've got policing, but you've also got customs and immigration. And when you think about the impact of Brexit that's come over the hill, with your connections to the continent, how challenging has that been as part of your role?
Well, I think certainly taking up the chief officer role, one of the biggest challenges I had was understanding the complexity of customs and immigration work. As a career police officer, I get policing, I understand policing and the complexity of it. One of the, real challenges during my tenure has been Brexit and what the implications of Brexit have been. And I think one of the mistakes that had been made was prior to Brexit, there was very much pressure on public services to save money and reduce cost, and that our customs and immigration sort of intellectual long service officers wasn't retained, and we did lose quite a number of very experienced members of staff, which meant that when Brexit loomed, and then came to fruition, the staff had to really take on a huge piece of work in terms of how we had to adapt and manage our borders, manage the immigration changes. And I think, Crown dependencies and overseas territories have really been on a huge journey, as has the United Kingdom and our counter-terrorism borders policing. There are still legacy issues from Brexit, particularly around the information exchange with partners and different jurisdictions. That still isn't necessarily fully solved, but I think we're seeing a bit more daylight. But I have to say, I think the work that's been undertaken by my staff working in customs and immigration has been tremendous, and that they've really navigated a very, very difficult time in our history, because we are an island surrounded by water, but we're also part of the common travel area. Yes. So there are certain privileges as being part of the common travel area. So Jersey, Guernsey and the Isle of Man are within that area. So we benefited from that. But obviously Brexit did bring quite a few challenges.
Yeah, and I think if you, for someone who hasn't either thought about it or been part of it, it's hard to imagine the amount of work that is required. And I know we spoke some months ago, because I think it also changed the demographic of workers to the island. So there was some, and whether that's a good thing, bad thing, or it's neutral, it doesn't matter. The fact of the matter is, it did change it. It changed. So the impact of Brexit was really far-reaching, wasn't it?
Yes, it has. I mean, I would certainly say our population and the demographic of our population and the origins of people who are living and working here has changed hugely in the last, I would say, 5 to 10 years. And I think Brexit has probably speeded that up. So we're seeing far more people coming to work in the jurisdiction from much further afield, which is a good thing. And I think diversity and population change is to be embraced and welcomed, but that does bring a lot of immigration work with it, as well as the oversight and management of immigration. And I think one of the areas we're always on the lookout for is the abuse element of immigration, so the exploitation of people, in terms of migrant workforce not being abused or held to ransom, if you like, by being paid low wages and having their passports withheld. Those sorts of things, we're always very keen to make sure is not happening. And I think Guernsey is a very safe place, and it is a safe place for people who will come on short-term contracts and migrant work as well. But there isn't that sort of abuse that we probably see in other jurisdictions.
No. What would you say on policing then? What would you say, as you kind of reflect on your time as a chief officer, what would you say are the key challenges you've had in your tenure?
From a chief officer point of view, I would say getting legislation up to date in terms of modern legislation that particularly we see in the UK. We have a limited amount of government. We have a limited amount of process that can accommodate legislative change. So some of that necessary change has been relatively slow in coming because there just isn't the capacity. I think the other big challenge has been recruitment and retention. As an island, we have more or less full employment, and there's a lot of work in different areas. For example, we have a strong finance sector, strong public service sector, and so there is competition for within that labour force. So I think that also the demographic of young people, and the fact that you and I went into a career many years ago and stuck at it. I think people do move and change careers far more than they used to. So when you've got an organisation that has a structure and a rank structure, and a structure where if you leave an organisation and go and do something else, it doesn't really allow or facilitate you to come back into the organisation, maybe at a higher rank, because you've had that external experience. Yeah. I think it's those sorts of things that present challenges, and we are absolutely open to looking at modern workforce. One of the things that we haven't been able to look at is the policing degree. We don't have access to an easy access to a university in order to facilitate it. So we've very much still been working on for initial recruitment as a local initial course and a local upskilling. And to date, recruitment in that sphere has been challenging. I'm really pleased to say we've got a brand new cohort of students who've just joined us, local students, student officers, 5 of them, and they're in their initial course. So that's really positive, and the quality of candidate that I've seen in this most recent course has been really good. We are recruiting from the UK, both at sergeant and constable rank, but it's you get a lot of interest, but it's turning that interest into people who actually come across and make Guernsey their home. So we do the best we can to facilitate that, and there is a sort of relocation package that's quite attractive if people do decide to come over. And of course, it's about bringing people from other forces, bringing their own skills, their own experiences into our organisation, and that really helps, bring growth and development as well.
You're right, and I mean, I would encourage anyone if they're good and they want to do something different and expand their careers to consider overseas. I would do. I did it myself, so we'll probably come back to that. But there's 2 other things here that struck me about the Channel Islands. Firstly, unlike the Caribbean, your processes, your policies, your legislation is a far greater relationship with the UK, more regulated than perhaps Caribbean policing are because they have their own jurisdictions. And I'm always impressed with both you and Jersey, with limited resources, how compliant you have. HMIC inspections, for example, and you've got your expectations. HMIC, for example's expectations of you is the same for a county force or in the UK. So I think you do an extraordinary job. Is that a challenge to keep that level of the standard of required of the force in terms of its oversight, governance, regulations?
Yes, I think obviously governance is absolutely the right word. It's about knowing that you need that external inspection and you need that external scrutiny to make sure you're on track. I think one of the very clear things I've always said is we're a force about learning, and we don't always get it right. And it is about trying to have that culture among staff that we're doing a very, very difficult job, often in challenging circumstances, and that if you don't get it right, reflect, do that learning, and part of that is having external inspection as well. So we do, we're not, HMIC don't have a mandate to come. We have to invite them in, and we periodically do. I think we're actually looking to work with HMIC to do more thematic inspections and specialist areas rather than do a sort of more wider force-led inspection. So I think Jersey are committing to a inspection of safeguarding and offender management and areas like that, which we hope to follow on as well in the not too distant future. But it's at early days, and obviously the political board of Home Affairs, which is our equivalent to the Home Office, it's a matter for them to invite the HMI in and to commission the inspection. So that's a piece of work that will be developing in 25-26.
And the other thing, Rory, as well, I mentioned it about you're a national police force, and people don't necessarily consider it that, but that's what it is. There is no one else. You're
It is.
head of law
Yep.
enforcement. And the other bit that I think a lot of forces in the UK don't have is that that response around economic crime and finances, which it doesn't just impact upon policing, but actually could really impact on the economy, the way the government run, and the way the island's sit. And that's a really big commitment for you, isn't it?
Yes, it is. I mean, a huge part of our GDP is financial services and the financial services industry. We are currently in the money val process, and we're at the end of the current inspection process across all national, international jurisdictions, and we are hopefully reaching the conclusion of that process soon. So I can't speak at all publicly about how that process is going, but it is a huge amount of work. And Guernsey's response over the last 3 to 4 years has been to establish a new financial and economic crime bureau, which has its own director. So in essence, some of that responsibility has moved away from law enforcement into this specific new area. But I think one of the challenges has been finding staff to work in that area of law enforcement, because internationally it is expected that there is a competent response to allegations around money laundering, terrorist financing, and we live in a world where there are vast amounts of money moving around the world, some of which is linked to crimes. So from a jurisdiction perspective, we're really focusing and making sure that we get the right response to that. And it shows the jurisdiction, quite rightly, taking these sorts of issues really seriously.
Yeah, it's impressive as a force and for a small jurisdiction as a whole that they manage that. But okay, and just kind of reflecting now on your career, because I know you're very close to your last day before you start what's next. Do you have any kind of real reflections? Because it is a big moment when after 40 years in public service and law enforcement in some extraordinary challenging roles you've done, and the one you're currently in is as challenging as anything, for the reasons we've discussed. Do you have any kind of immediate reflections?
I think it's the people I've met, the people I've worked with, the people I've had to deal with, both good and bad. The stories we can all tell. I mean, it is a rich 40 years in terms of what's gone on. It hasn't always been easy. It hasn't always been pleasurable. Some things that have taken place, particularly recently in Guernsey, have been almost unpleasant in terms of certain vexatious issues that have been generated. I think the world in which I started my career, without social media, without some of the things we see today that have such an impact, it's been a phenomenal period of change. I reflect, I can almost remember those first few shifts as a bobby back in London to finishing tomorrow, which tomorrow's my last day as chief officer, and it's just been an absolute privilege. And you've got to thank those you've worked with. You've got to thank your family for putting up with you. Indeed. And putting up with being alongside you on the career. Yes. And I just reflect that along the way I've done a bit of good. Hopefully, or for me personally, it's been a privilege, and I've seen and learned so much. And I think it's time now to let someone else take the strain here. And I know there's an excellent officer coming in as my successor, and I do wish him well, and I wish the team well and the whole organisation. And I think the future of law enforcement here in Guernsey is on a good foundation. Obviously, we will continue to do a very difficult job as well as we possibly can. And I think it's the same for our partners and the other Crown dependencies. So it's been an absolute privilege, and I'm looking forward to doing something a little bit different.
Yes. Well, look, I want to say thanks for being interviewed. Thanks for talking to me. It's been fascinating. But I've got to know you a bit better now over the last few months, and I genuinely just want to say you should be really proud of your policing career, or what you've achieved on Guernsey is extraordinary, and it is extraordinary. And to see the level of the standard of the staff, the standard of the force, what you achieve in terms of that governance, and and against the backdrop of really limited resources sometimes, almost constantly, and that's very typical of small jurisdictions. But I just want to add my personal congratulations. It's 40 years public service, and you should be rightly proud of it. And you are right to say thank you to families, because they do go on the journey, don't they? So, but I just want to add my congratulations, and I wish you the very, very best for what comes next. What you'll bring to it, whatever comes next, I know will be as extraordinary the 40 years you've done. So I hope you enjoy the next day or so just as you depart, but go with my best wishes, and good luck for what's next. But it's been a pleasure, and thank you so much for joining me in this discussion.
And thank you for your kind words, Trevor. It's been a pleasure talking to you as well. Thank you.